Hello and welcome to The Value of Everything. Now we are going to explore the second part of my little topic of discussions around governments and economics. The first one was what's the word? Utopia, and now we're doing dystopia. I wanted it to be a little bit interesting. See which podcast was going to be a bit more popular than the other. I thought Dystopia is going to be a popular in itself anyway, so I decided to do Utopia beforehand and give it a couple of days, probably, I think it's been about a week and a bit probably now, until I release the next one, and I was just going to see the count, see how the popularities between the two of those would go, and see if that is a reflection of human psyche. For one, I would say that a lot of us are quite pessimists. I was thinking when I was walking down the stairs to my car today, I was thinking that really we can only focus on one good thing in our lives, I think, at a time. There's not really a multitude of different things that can happen that are really is that pleasant. However, the human psyche does seem to and can focus on a multitude of different problems all at the same time. It's maybe the reason why we can survive. Maybe it's the reason for our own sort of evolution, that we have these grasps, that we only really try to attain one goal at a time, yet we focus on all of the environment's issues which can occur and bite us in the arse at any stage, which is kind of interesting in itself. So I think that's probably going to be the case. I think this one's going to probably lift off a little bit quicker than in comparison to Utopia, but we'll see. So just before I delve into this a little bit further, obviously this is all based upon just little hypotheses and theories. None of it potentially could manifest itself. However, there is certain things which potentially could come about. I think economic crisis is fairly likely. I don't think there's any real sort of option to get out of the trough of all of the credit or stroke debt expansion which has been occurring over years upon decades, really, and unbalanced government budgets and all the rest of it. So I believe there's going to be some certain kind of crush, but it depends on how we manage it. And one of the most important things and the most important lessons in the whole couple of episodes is that it's really up to us. It's our own self-empowerment, how we can deal with the situations, how we can help each other out, and really it's the way that you can get yourself prepared, not like being like a total like underground bunkered with gold bars and tin food prepper, but how you get yourself prepared, how you give yourself certain skills that you can market into the outside world, how you can convert into a system, how we can start trading true value rather than this currency that is all ever expanded and really just loses its meaning over time. It's kind of interesting how I think probably this kind of episode will probably gather more popularity as these predictions or these almost certainties will start to come about. So here I am from the past telling you how things may be in the future, and things are actually kind of alright at the moment. There's no real panics in terms of food shortages or anything like that, so it's kind of interesting from this person's perspective of me sitting here with a nice full stomach from the night before and things like that. So, yeah, anyway, I'm gonna play through a number of these scenarios. Just remember another thing, which before I delve through each one of these scenarios, I will say to you this doom situation, and for every doom situation that occurs, for every reaction, there is an equal opposite reaction as well in terms of energy and everything else. So even if something kind of dangerous happens, there potentially is a option for something good to counteract that in terms of every dangerous situation. So just remember that whenever I go through all of these bad things, it's not necessarily about you just getting more and more depressed and going into your own cell and worry about the world. Remember that there is options out there where people can turn things around at every step of the way. Good people can stand up. It's obviously when the main reason when tyranny and evil people can get away with things is when good people stay quiet and nothing happens in their respect. I've butchered that quote, but you sort of get what I mean. So even if I'm giving you a lot of fairly depressing theories which potentially could manifest, there is always your little working brain which can obviously have a few little backup turnarounds or things where you can counteract these bad things which can happen in society, which can help us obviously turn things around. So I'm not doing this just to purely depress people in the world. If you're looking for just pure doom porn, this isn't really the place to come to. This is really just a place where we can sort of gather our thoughts, get better ideas, and really find solutions to problems in this world. So let me begin. So I'm going to just play out the economic scenario, which I think is fairly is probably fairly likely, and I would probably say in this respect as well, I would say probably governments are probably quite prepared for this as well at the same time. So we have, in the Western world particularly, and most other countries as well, we have a credit expansion system. When we say credit, basically we are issuing debt, which is to be paid in the future. Now, as you pile on more and more debt onto the world, you still require this certain point in which the debts have to be paid. And the problem is that these debts really are getting to a state where they cannot be paid. There is not really enough production and wealth being created by the middle class or the working class for that to ever be accomplished. Therefore, there will be a point in which there will be, sometimes it could be called like the Minsky moment, where people are unable to pay down this ridiculous amount of debt. And regardless of how governments will be printing money to purchase its own bonds, to artificially keep interest rates low for a long time, and to keep liquidity flowing down to the corporations and the banking sectors, it's not really viable, and I don't think it can continue on forevermore. So what potentially is going to happen is, as we are sort of going through this right now, is that the economy will just gradually... the statistics might say some positive things. However, you'll get all of a sudden what's really happening is obviously there's so much debt expansion. All assets have been ballooned out of proportion, and really there has to be some kind of balancing act in the ballooning of all of these asset expansions. And that basically means is deflation. So you've inflated markets rapidly with money expansion. Now it's time for, because of the amount of debt owing and the incapability of people paying off these debts, you require a deflation in certain asset classes. And we are seeing that in commodity prices, and we'll be seeing that through a lot of other markets as things go on. So once we have certain markets which are very tender to banking sectors, like the housing market, start to deflate, then we have much more dangerous scenarios occurring to the governments, because when I say dangerous, I mean economically problematic to the governments, because these, obviously the banking sector is basically your ability to send credit into the system, which is pretty much like the lifeblood or the value system in which people can trade with each other. Now, if there is massive restrictions, if loans cannot be continued, if the margins get called in, so if you've been basically buying one property and then you've bought another property on on the basis of this other investment property, and it's gone on and on. You basically, once your portfolio starts to get downgraded and it's worth a lot less, and you want to sell up, but you can't meet any of the actual purchasing prices that you ever made in the first place, you get margin called out of your position until you find that you're in a situation of bankruptcy. And this bankruptcy has an effect all across the stream, and it starts to have a domino effect on all of the prices. Not only this, but we have banking sectors which have, I guess they have had better capital requirements recently, but even so, they cannot really afford to have one of the bigger institutional banks falling on them. If there was that case, then there would be a massive amount of credit default swaps, which would start to be called in. So that's basically if the creditor defaulted, then you have to make payments. So there's all these little products which can just kick off in a massive combustion chamber way, which is all set to explode unless the markets continuously increase and always credit expand. So you can see that we're sort of we're on this rocket and it should only go up, but if this rocket at any stage goes down, then it basically explodes. And that's sort of the situation that we're in now. If we get to a situation where we have one of the asset classes that starts to depreciate quite rapidly, say stock markets, or say incidentally on the stock market side, we have people that are getting all this lovely free liquidity, which is at low interest rates, and they are using that credit to buy back their own stocks without actually improving or retooling their factories or making production lines any better or making better products. They're just repurchasing their own value back on itself, which is not doing anything other than inflating prices. So yeah, just going back to that point. So economically, we can have a situation where obviously everyone's retracting on their spending and their production, and they're employing less people, and that obviously signals to the market that it's time to spend less. And when the customers start to spend less and there isn't any more job expansion which is occurring, then we do have an issue in terms of the credit expansion system not being able to, or the inflationary system not being able to sustain itself any further. At this point, we do have, obviously, commodity markets can get smashed to smithereens. It's kind of interesting how the commodity markets obviously is really, it's interesting where we have peak oil, where there's we've really produced we've got the right now we've got all of them easy attainable oil, and we're producing it into the world. Yet that price is just being absolutely squashed down. Yet we still manage to maintain high house prices and relatively high stock prices. So it's just a matter of time as to the market to go, okay, well, really, the economy is going to start spitting out and start to depress other markets. So at some point where it starts to hit the finance sectors and the housing sectors, the insurance sectors, that's where it becomes very problematic for governments, and the governments would have to step in. So at this point, the government has a couple of options. It would either say to its people, right, we're going to let the banks fold and we're going to just start from the ground up, which at first would be a complete catastrophe, but it possibly for the long term might be a better sort of option. Obviously, it would create a lot of chaos at first, but it's one of the sort of cold turkey ways of rebuilding the system. The other way would be to say, okay, well, we're really in a financial hardship position. We need to obtain a certain amount of liquidity still in the market. So we are going to bail in these banks. And what they probably would say is that you're like in what happened in Cyprus. They'll say, okay, well, your bank savings and things like that, we sort of are going to have to use them, but obviously you can take out your day-to-day withdrawals, but if you've got any large savings and stuff like that, you can't really take that out of the bank anymore. We're going to have to just keep that in as just a measure, just to keep these banks afloat, and the banks will have the opportunity to do that. Obviously, that will cause a little bit of panic in the banking sectors, and people will try and get their money out as quickly as they possibly can. However, there will be withdrawal restrictions. The other easy way is to potentially get the pension funds and say, okay, we're going to use all the pension funds as the blocker of this financial collapse, and we're going to just use these pension funds just to prevent this market turmoil in terms of this liquidity crisis. So you can see that either one option or the other would create a massive retrenchment of, and basically the main word is asset confiscation, because at some point or in which some point in time, maybe any of those assets will not be able to be retained back to the people. Also, you would have an issue in terms of whereby there is a liquidity crisis, the governments may have to pursue more options of quantitative easing, where they have to print money into existence. I think they do a system of providing it to the Treasury. Then the Treasury purchases its own debt issuance, the government's debts. So they basically print money, and then they provide it with, and then they issue the government will say, I will owe $1 billion in 10 years' time, but then they print themselves their own money to purchase their own debts. So kind of a very sort of like using your credit card to pay off your mortgage kind of thing. But that's what they're doing, and that basically brings down the value of the dollar. But we have this situation where basically prices potentially could be depressed, but then also prices could be increased at the same time, because if you are devaluing your dollar and then you have commodity prices as well, you may have a real sort of outrun in how much an item costs. And I would say in general, as people have gone over time, people have found that certain material goods like foods have become a lot more expensive over time, and that is probably going to sustain itself quite so much. So whereby food wasn't taking too much of the family's average weekly spend, now it's taking up a lot more, and there is a definite drop down in living standards. So let's just push that button a little bit further in terms of that scenario, and we could get ourselves into a situation where the dollar or any other currency cannot afford really, the dollars are really not being able to afford this kind of produce like foods and stuff like that. So that at that point, this is where the people go, this is ridiculous, this currency is worth trash. We really need to have this coin being worth more, because it's not being able for us to purchase any of these goods. It's really like destroying the purchasing power of the people. And then there's obviously a kickback between the government and the people as to how much their currency is being smashed to smithereens. This obviously is one of the sort of scenarios, and you could see potentially that you would have, which you do have which are happening in sort of like the almost-ish or just slightly emerged third world countries. Sort of like it's happening quite a lot in the Middle East at the moment. Egypt, Lebanon, things like that. They're rioting over the governments not being able to, they're not really being able to have a fairly decent living standard of being able to buy food goods and things like that. And sewage is not being, or waste is not being picked up by the government. The services are being retracted. There's less and less services, and obviously as these times occur and international debt markets will say, okay, well, I really would need, if you're going to sell these bonds, because part of the bonds which the government sell are sold into an international market, they probably are going to request a much higher interest rate if they're going to purchase any of these bonds. So then, it could come to a situation where you have the government raising interest rates just to sustain a certain level of sustenance for the people, so that their purchasing power is increased a little bit. the currency isn't trashed to smithereens, so there is a certain viability of that. This also means that if there is certain inflation which is occurring in the market, particularly the foods and things like that, then they have to use gold, the gold reserves, to purchase back their currency to keep a sustainability going on. If you have inflation, then obviously this is a big marker of how gold is start to get used quite rapidly to keep the currencies at balance. So at this time, taxes would be increased as well. So your taxes are going to be increased more so and more so, just to enable the sustainability of the government. Is going to have increased amounts of debt, and obviously if it's got all these increased amounts of debts and it's just paying off the deficits, and then it's just increased the interest rates as well just to pay off the inflation at the same time, I guess to a certain extent the original debt that's been occurred has been slightly devalued by all the inflation that's happened at the same time, but yet the citizens are rapidly much more poorer by all the inflation which has occurred. So you have this scenario where services are less, taxes are rising, and the government's viability is in question. This potentially, obviously, I mentioned a little bit about people uprising, people getting a bit annoyed about how we're getting less and less for more taxes and more taxes, and this is an increasingly problematic situation. You would obviously have a little bit of a problem in terms of our civil liberties at this point, because maybe the government would require military personnel to defend government agencies. Maybe there would be an increase in certain looting which would occur. Maybe the poor people, or the people that have been evicted from their houses because of the crisis and the joblessness and the increase of interest rates on the international lending markets, have pushed them out of the market, and people are actually really pricing in how much debt is worth. The poor are starting to squat in other people's abandoned houses, so you're going to potentially get a bit more of that. People are going to sort of, the poor, I mean, if I was a poor person from a ghetto, I'll be like, right, okay, let me find some rich person, and at least I can steal an iPhone or something like that, and that might be able to get me some food or whatever else. So that you may find a situation where you would have the poor going after the rich more so, whereas I think really just a majority of the time it's poor on poor, or the same race on same race sort of violence, which occurs mostly in today's world. So that situation can definitely happen. So yeah, I've mentioned confiscation. So confiscation, you don't know how far governments could go to push the confiscation button, but we could say that the governments could go far as to say, okay, we require this, we require that. We require you to, everybody's in this together, so we need everybody to start paying more taxes or give us certain amounts to their bank balances and accounts, and maybe we need to start trying to get access to overseas assets, or refusing or limiting access of travels. So we would, the governments potentially would say, okay, well, if you've got all these overseas assets, we're going to start basically denying you of citizenship. Whatever we can do, we might deny you of passports, so you can't flee from this current country. Obviously, that's one of the major things that potentially would occur, which would be mass migrations across countries. So people which would be seeking work, and people which would be avoiding debts, because people would be like, oh my gosh, I've got all of this debt, people are chasing me down, I'm going to just get out of town, I'm going to get away from this place, start again. And then obviously the vice versa, people are saying, okay, there's no food around here, I'm just going to have to move out to potentially the country, be a farmhand, whatever, I don't care, I'll be a serf, and see how happens, see things how happen there. Okay, so that's all fairly worrying. Obviously, any kind of violence, I would be very, very well, I'd say basically any kind of violence, I would say, is not really at all recommended unless it's for your own self-defense. But yeah, whenever there's sort of a riot situation, the government's got all the power, it's got all the guns, it's really going to win. Unless it's a situation where, this is another problem actually for governments as well, is that while a government is losing its power, losing the value of its currency, then you have potential within the ranks of the government of power struggles. So the government's certain arms, you've got obviously different political parties, you've got different departments, particularly one of the ones which is always the most, obviously the most keen and has got the best abilities to do this, which would be the military arms. So the whoever the field marshal or the general commander of the military would be, obviously in America's sense it is the president, but however you could have whoever the next in line in the military force would be, could say, okay, well, this government is absolutely diabolical. The people are not really being served. It is time for the military to take over. And you could, and then the military could stage a coup d'etat on the White House. Who knows what kind of weird little scenario could be played out within the government itself. So that is obviously a very problematic scenario. You obviously, I always say there's definitely good people in governments. There's probably some people that are probably a little bit megalomaniac, but there are probably some very good people in government as well. And you would obviously hope that it wouldn't really turn to this or come to this, but there are definite scenarios where people can get a little bit power hungry, and definitely people, especially if people are not getting paid and people have got families to feed and things like that, that's where rationale starts to get thrown out the window pretty rapidly, and governments and military arms start having a little bit of an infight between each other and go, well, this is America and we have got a ridiculously large military, so you could try and say that the military are going to be paid in another 2 years' time. But we're not going to put up with this. We're going to basically take over the power now, because we obviously have all the power. So yeah, that's one of the problems where you have economic crises. You do have the government not only trying to bat off the citizens who are complaining about all their money being stolen from them and everything else, but they're having infighting struggles on their own turf and own territory itself. And in its own self, they have to retract themselves. They have to make the government smaller and smaller. They have to close departments rapidly on a rapid scale, and really get down to the ultra basic life support systems just to keep the power going. Okay, so one thing also in terms of civil liberties is that we potentially could have a little bit more in terms of information blackouts. So we may find that internets could be, or internet service providers could be asked to shut down in terms of if there is a massive load of civil disobedience or whatever's going on. So the Twitter accounts, the Googles, I know that they all sit quite closely to each other. You potentially could have a little bit of an information freeze, particularly if the government is going through a certain major crisis. So that is obviously very dangerous in terms of information not being able to get out, and obviously that is an Orwellian 1984 situation. But I would expect that there is. Remember that every time that I'm mentioning these things, there are certain things that can come back. Obviously, you've got peer-to-peers, you've got people that can. I think there's different ways that you can kickstart the internet. You've got all different things like Tor and everything else, which can stop a centralization of internet and things like that. So it's not. I don't really think, unless you're just really dependent on internet service providers and a very easy use to thing, I don't think you can really shut down information nowadays. But I would imagine that governments do have certain options and things like that where they could say, okay, well, obviously they have passed acts in terms of the Patriot Act where they can take information at will, but there is obviously things where they could probably shut down information as well. And it is probably it's obviously worrying how people could the government can take data at will, but it's probably even more worrying how the freedom of information could be shut down as well, which is always a little bit of a panic. Particularly, obviously, as we have these nice, moderate, friendly governments right now, it would be a lot more dangerous if we have a very extremist government who comes into power around the election time, and he starts pointing the finger of blame at certain things and certain people. So you've got like the Adolf Hitler scenario where, but obviously it could be any sort of thing, any kind of area of which he could point his finger at blame. He could point his finger of blame at the 1%. He could point the finger of blame at the welfare class. He could point the finger of at blame on a certain race. He could blame the blacks. He could blame even a race from abroad, so like the Chinese. That finger could wag. It could even wag at the whites, middle class. But I don't think really from a Western world perspective, you can't really go against the majority. But if the majority is starting to go into the minority, then potentially you could have that as well. So there's all these different things. You could blame the atheists. There's endless things that you could point the finger of blame at and oppose and potentially get yourself into power. And people, obviously, when they've got hunger in their bellies and they've just got a lot of spite and anger left in them, they really want to find somebody to blame in this world. And there is, there is your opportunity of these extremists to come into power and to obviously destroy civil liberties harder and harder. Maybe they're the ones who say, okay, well, it's this freedom that we've had. It's maybe all this internet freedom that we've had, which has really shut down the government's ability over time. And we need to shut down this internet and bring ourselves back to a time in which all this crap didn't happen beforehand. We need to bring us back to a light machinery stage in our lives and bring us back to I don't know, whatever era. Or you could have any certain political power to come into the mix at any stage, particularly when people are desperate and they want answers. Obviously, where people are searching for jobs and stuff like that, people are going to undergo a lot more desperation. So obviously, you could predict that people might be just very desperate, just looking for jobs, walking around the city with sandwich boards, going, "I'm desperate. I will take any job, any price, you name it. I will take it on." You would potentially have prostitution, all of those child begging. A lot of those things that you potentially see in third world countries would start to manifest itself in Western countries. Particularly if there isn't much food and shelter to go around. And particularly when you're living in Western countries, there isn't really, it's not quite as comfortable as living in, say, somewhere like Cambodia outside compared to living in sort of Scotland outside. So there potentially is increased desperation on part of the people, and obviously where there's increased desperation, there is very good people. Obviously, I'm talking about dystopia here, so there is good people around, but also there is people that will exploit other people. So you do have a tendency for that kind of shit to rear its ugly head, and people are exploiting people to a certain extent. Obviously, this is one of the... Exploitation is a very tricky word. I must say one thing in terms of exploitation. If somebody is offering somebody a job and that person is starving, and even if that job is working 16 hours a day or something like that, and that person is starving and there is no other jobs available to them, then I would say that that person has got the choice of being exploited or starve from hunger. Now, in that scenario, I would say it's probably not really exploitation which is occurring, but really survival which is occurring. But obviously, there is certain situations where people have not got access to internet, information, things like that, and people will come along under the pretense that people are not well educated, things like that, and will exploit them and take advantage for them and really not give them what really they should be worth or should they be valued in and things like that, to think in the long-term sustainable way and manner. So just obviously there's that little caveat in terms of exploitation and just being very sure about these kind of things. One thing that obviously doesn't come around too often, and obviously the mindset of a lot of people is this way inclined, but obviously governments can be perceived as very good-natured, friendly entities who provide welfare and that obviously law and order, and they're that sort of motherly, that big brother that sort of protects you in times of need and are there for you when there's problems and gives you civil advice and looks after your health and all of those great things that governments can provide for. However, in economic hardships and things like that, the problem that could occur is that people are starting to see the ugly side of government, whereby they see more so the poor side of government, which would be the taxation, the military, the you're not allowed to go past these points, the you must do this or else, that kind of government may start to manifest itself, and people are not quite used to seeing that side of the government, and it will be a potentially a scary moment and a shocking moment for a lot of people that might not have ever perceived the government to be that way inclined. Maybe not this government, but maybe the next government. So it is it could be a fairly enlightening thing, but obviously it's in a dystopian sort of manner, of which what could happen to the world that people are being joyously walking around in right now, and then all of a sudden discover that these things can become quite rapidly bad. Another thing that I just was glancing on and things like that is that you do have, and this is obviously one of the dangers, where you do have a power which is losing its the power of the wealth and things like that, and its ability to pay off the military and the police and things like that, is that you do obviously have an increased level of criminality, and with the increased level of criminality, you do have potential like mafia scenario mob forms of people. So one of the more of a common occurrences which is occurring in the news recently is that you're getting mob robberies. So you're getting a gang of youths probably working together, probably 10 of them. They all walk into a shop. Couple of them create a bit of a disturbance for the shopkeeper, and the rest just fill up their backpacks and then flee. And they have used and applied a very sophisticated method of robbery to people which are basically outnumbered. And obviously, if things like places like America or other countries which do not have any very high self-defense liberties like gun ownership and things like that, they are unable to defend themselves or defend their property from theft. So we do have those dangers. I guess it's less so in America, where they do have guns, because you've got less of that risk happening, because if I go into a shop and start looting in America, I know that I could probably get my head shot off. But in other countries, we have less gun laws. We have increased gun laws, which basically prevents all of us from having any weaponry, and it means that we are really heavily dependent on the police to provide us with our protection. Obviously, the police can't be sitting on every corner, but people would say, okay, well, there's cameras and these things like that, which would really catch up with us eventually, and people will be arrested for things. So people don't really commit these crimes because they know that there's a fair, highly likelihood of them getting caught. However, a government on its knees with really just the police just putting out fires pretty much all the time. They're firefighting from one mass criminality to another. And obviously, if the police are just absolutely on their backs, they're just being overthrown at every point. They're only going to pick on the battles that they can win. So they're going to just try and like do very small civil problems, which only a few people which is amongst a few people. But if there's like big looting, big civil unrest, no way that a police force can manage that, especially if they've been asked to work on less resources and less manpower and things like that. So obviously at that point the military gets called in as well. But then you also have this scenario of martial law, where if there is looting or robbery and things like that, people just get their heads shot off at the straight instant, and you lose the innocent to proven guilty and all of those really important things in terms of morality and law and order. We lose all of those civil liberties very quickly in terms of the martial law, which gets kicked into place because of mass like mob robberies and things like that. And now obviously this is happening from people's desperation. There is obviously a lot of reasoning behind why people would do this, and you could say to a certain extent there's probably justification, but probably not justification for them to rob against just a normal businessman who's trying to carve his own way of life for himself and his family. So yeah, you do have this is probably and out of all the things that you could think of, everybody can restart with zero money again. Everyone can start like building up value and things like that. But the one concern that I think is probably the more dangerous one is where we lose civil liberties. Once we start to lose our civil liberties, there's no real telling how we get that back and how hard it would be to get that back. And if we live in a world where there is a military force embargoing us during the daytime, and it's saying, okay, well, you're not allowed to leave your house after dark, and you're seeing soldiers walking up and down your streets and things like that, you're like, oh shit, this is really not the world that I wanted to live in and stuff. And if these soldiers and if whoever's the government power in at that point in time is putting through these laws to say, right, we need to confiscate any kind of wealth, and they walk in and they knock on your door and they say, right, what have you got in your house? We need to use this stuff. We need to sell this stuff. This is for the greater good of the government. You're like, holy shit, I didn't realize this is going to come to this kind of point. So, yeah, there could be a certain level of bleakness in the world that we could live in. And particularly, obviously, if you do live in a militarized state of power and you are really fearing for yourself, you've turned into I forgot that Dutch girl's name. Anyway, but you're basically living like a Jew in a Nazi oppressed world. You're like, holy shit, why the hell has it come to all of this? Why have I got a military force walking up and down the road, telling people what to do, what to eat, what time to fill up my water tank, and all of this kind of stuff? I mean, obviously, if you get on well with the military people and you probably look the same as them, it's probably not too bad for you as it would be for some Nazi to another Nazi soldier. But for the other people that are being persecuted on the street and things like that, you are in that certain scenario where the silent people, where problems and issues of people getting too much power to their heads can take too much, has too much of that come into their head, and they can get a little bit out of order. So they could throw people to the ground, stick a gun barrel to their heads, and order them to do certain things which really wouldn't be something that they would want to do in the first place. And you're there, standing there, witnessing it all, and really not having a word to say about it because you're not the one that's being picked on at that moment. So this is how governments, military forces, government is really force. Unfortunately, it is the use of force to redistribute wealth. People don't quite realise that, but that's obviously the way that the government manifests itself. And yeah, if a government is pushed to the wall and the money's run out, you're going to just see what's remaining of the government, and that is the gun. It's an awful shame. We would love the government to be this very peaceful entity that just provides great services and taxes very, very smallly and works out how to build communities and build happiness and build prosperity. But there is good people, there is good governments, there's good people in governments that try to do these things. However, when things are scraped down to the bare bone, you do end up with this gun barrel. And that is the dystopia that we could potentially find ourselves in. And obviously that is the worrying thing. As always, I mentioned at the start of this podcast that at any point, at any stage, good people can stand up and really speak words and speak their mind. It is the intellectual that can... Well, it's the one that can speak the words and say, this is unjust, we can do something better than this, we better find a better solution than this, and we don't need to go down this route of more force, more power, more militarization of the world that we live in, more of a shutdown of information, a shutdown of civil liberty. We can sustain a certain level of civil liberty which prosecutes the ones who have got evil intent and who have done evil acts, and we will give people a lot of freedom to pass borders and travel and migrate and be free and to do things that they want to do without being hampered without being taxed, without being told what to do, how to do it, where they could self-manage their own resources and be economical in themselves, and to not have a situation where their money is just being inflated into rapid expansion to nothingness, so it goes to a hyperinflated state where the money in their pocket is only just worth the fire paper that it could be turned into. So it's all of these things, and really one of the most important things I'd like to say is just really at every point I'm mentioning these things, there is a better way. There is a peaceful way of dealing with all of these situations. There are people that are going to be in a state of desperation whenever a horrific thing or a horrific act happens. People would love to turn to the state. Everyone likes that big brother to protect them in a time of need, but really that big brother isn't really the full answer to the situation. It's really what should be happening is we should all be sitting at tables and discussing and understanding and working out ways and solutions of how we can prevent any further violence and how we can give ourselves plenty of freedom, where we can live in a world where we can all enjoy each other's company, rather than seeking to our big brother to smash up anybody who has done an ill against us. Really, they're the sort of it's that sort of pause, that point of calm that is required in every kind of these situations, rather than that panic and what can we do? What is the solution now? What like how can we resolve this problem? How can, like, these terrorists have bombed the Twin Towers? We need to declare war on a country. Would it be Saudi Arabia? No, because even though all the people that were in those planes were from Saudi Arabia, they're the oil states. We need to attack Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that. So it's always that kind of mentality and that thinking which can really put humanity into a very dangerous spot, whereby what we really need to do is find really sensible, quiet, peaceful moments where we just say, okay, it's time to pause, it's time to think about these things. Maybe we should come to a solution in a few days' time and things like that. I know obviously people would like where you get warmongers they go, now's the time to seize the opportunity. But where we're talking about our own problems and things that are happening on our own turf, in our own governments and things like that, it is really time to pause and think about things and how the structure of the system is working, and really to delve deep and find or ask questions is probably the most important thing, rather than finding answers. Deductive reasoning and working out what is the best solution for everybody involved in this mix, working out how we can resolve these problems without them having to reoccur again. And obviously, like with America, they did write all of these books of laws, and they were good laws to keep the liberty of America alive as long as possible. But certain things have gone haywire in the mix, and it's probably time to review all of those laws and potentially work out different ways that governments could be run, potentially even get into a state where we could try and find private solutions to problems which the governments would always be involved in. And I've covered a lot of podcasts in the past about private solutions that could occur, and that is a very immense economic value that you can provide to the country that you're living in and things like that. So definitely it is things to explore, and all things to think about. So yeah, all of these problems and these situations don't necessarily have to happen. We can find means and ways around them, and really the future is in our hands. We can sit there and look at YouTube and look at one doom porn scenario after another, but really it's not going to get us any further. Really what has to happen is that annoying thing about where it happens in philosophy, is where we need to go to the mirror, look at ourselves, see what we can do, what things we can do to help other people, be as virtuous, try to be a model of virtue to other people, have kids look up to you and feel inspired by you, and then you try and do good deeds to other people, and it's just this reciprocal cycle that continues on. For where there's evil acts or there's problematic acts, you stand tall and then you call out, and then hopefully some brother of virtue is behind you to say, yep, he or she is right. And it's that kind of thing which can change the world for the better. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. We are all together in this, unfortunately, and well, no, fortunately we're together, but unfortunately we're in this scenario. So yeah, it's in your hands. Look at yourself in the mirror, play that Michael Jackson song, and I will be back for more podcasts. Thank you very much.